Where's my start? Oh, there it is. Okay, I think we're going. Shalom. Hey, there's Woody and Luz. Lucecita, shalom. Yeah.
I don't know if that one's going or not because it's good. There.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, live 4 or 5 seconds, so it's going.
Okay.
So we're on Facebook live stream is going, and YouTube is going. And we're trying to get Zoom going, but the problem with trying to get all three, I believe we figured out, is that all three require a camera. And so...
Go back to that other page real quick, the Zoom page.
Hello, Michael. So we can't, there's only so many cameras. You can only have so many programs going at the same time. There's Shalom. I don't know if any of you have tried signing in anyway. You might be able to hear, but maybe not see. Maybe we could see you, but you can't see us on Zoom.
Where it says more.
More?
No.
Okay. No.
Okay.
Trying to see if we can use we have 2 cameras hooked up, and then there's the one inside the laptop. We'll try to see where settings are so we could get the one that's in the laptop, but I don't even see where settings are. Maybe you can get in there. If you want to try, Kathy will nudge me in a minute to try to see if anyone's if a waiting room even shows up. But it will not use our camera, so you won't actually be able to see me there. So maybe you have another program at the same time open. I don't know. Okay, anyway, that's enough of that. So shalom, Michael. Shalom, Angie. All right, and Tiffany and Keith. All right.
Zimra.
Yeah, I saw there's an update to Zoom, and I did that the other day. Maybe some others didn't. Maybe that's why they can't sign in. I don't know. That could be.
Could be.
All right. Well, anyway, here we go. We'll start talking right now with the message. We're gonna start with Shavuot. That's Exodus chapter 19. We're really gonna focus on Shavuot 20, and then move on to Acts and talk about the harvest. But I want to start with what's traditional in Judaism, Shavuot, which is to talk about the 10 words. And you know what the 10 words are, right? Go ahead and tell me what the 10 words are. And by that I mean there's another name for them.
Mm-hmm.
In the third, and here's why we do it, why it's traditionally Shavuot, that we believe that the Torah came to us, because it says in chapter 19 of Shemot, that's Exodus, in the 3rd month after the people of Israel, and you could put a comma there after 3rd month, in the 3rd month, comma, after the people of Israel had left the land of Egypt, the same day they came to the Sinai desert. And it's one of the clues that gets us to the time frame, to the right time frame, when we are in Shavuot. Okay. And there's some interesting comments here that are controversial today as far as where it was the crossing and whatnot. And one of those clues that some people are saying is a clue is in verse 4. I carried you on eagle's wings. In other words, when we left, it was very quick. We left very, as opposed to what you see in the movies, really, right. We wanted to get out of there, and we moved very quick. And God facilitated a quick movement. And he says, if you'll pay attention to what I say and keep my covenant, then you will be my own treasure from among all the peoples. And God's not particular, meaning he doesn't favor people just because of who they are, but because of obedience. But he promises to those who keep his covenant that, and he's giving his covenant to Israel and to the people who left Egypt with us, a great mixed multitude, that they would be his own treasure from among all peoples. And he can do that. He's the boss, right? All the earth is mine. What? Oh, check Zoom?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I got the nudge. Check Zoom and see if anybody... I don't see any kind of waiting room. I really don't.
No.
I think I'm just going to close that.
Yeah, we'll have to play around with that.
There's too many windows open. It's very confusing to try to track 3 programs. at the same time. So, and meeting for all. I don't think anyone was there. I couldn't
I
really
didn't
tell.
see anybody. Yeah.
Okay, so back to all the earth is mine, and you will be a kingdom of Kohanim for me. This is where the kingdom of Kohanim, kingdom of priests, first shows up, and later in the Brit Hadashah, the kingdom of royal priesthood, rather, right? A nation that's set apart. And verse 7, Moshe came and summoned the leaders of the people and presented them with all the words which Adonai had ordered him to say. Now, that's an interesting verse too, because we have a Mishnah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which some claim is a vast amount of additional things that Adonai told Moshe, to order the people. But Moshe here is saying he summoned the leaders of the people and presented them together with all these words which Adonai had ordered him to say. And there are other verses that say this as well. Many verses tell us he wrote everything down, and he told them everything that he wrote. All the people answered as one. They were in unity. They were echad. The people answered as one. Everything Adonai has said, we will do. Moshe reported these words of the people to Adonai. So you see, they were also, what's the word in Acts? In one accord. Right? I don't know how they all fit in one accord. It's not that big a car. Adonai said to Moshe, what? I know. So, see, I'm coming to you in a thick cloud so that the people will be able to hear when I speak with you. And also, he's coming to them so that the people will also trust in you, in Moshe, forever. Adonai is saying the people will trust in Moshe and Moses forever, and he's the one doing this. He's the one instigating this. It's a good thing to be trusting in Moshe forever. You see, and that's important. That'll come up again later. All right, and so he's supposed to separate them, and they're supposed to prepare for the third day. Kind of interesting. And there are supposed to be limits set for the people around the mountain, right?
Not just the people, but the animals too.
And the animals too. And anything that goes up, even touches the base of the mountain, is supposed to be put to death. God is holy. You can't come into the presence of God uninvited, right? And you can't look on him without dying, if on his face. And so this is why I said before, I'm coming to you in a thick cloud. Right? The thick cloud. No hand is to touch you. Touch it. It must be the person that does violate this fence, if you will, the boundary rather is a better word, around the mountain. No one's supposed to touch him to put him to death. He's got to be stoned or shot with arrows. You can't even touch, because he'll be holy in a sense for having touched the mountain, for even touching the mountain that God will be on the top of. Touching it at the base, there's a sense of holiness that you can't, no one else can touch them, or they're going to have it too. Neither animal nor human will be allowed to leave. And this is interesting, right? When the shofar sounds, they may go up. When the shofar sounds, they may go up on the mountain. All right, so Moshe went down from the mountain, separated the people, and he added something. He gives them the instructions, how they're supposed to wash and separate and then on the third day, he adds something. Did you notice that? Anybody who's done the reading? What did he add?
Don't have relations.
Don't approach a woman. He adds, Moshe adds that. God gave him a word, and Moshe added something to it. Seems like, but I think this is not adding like a different commandment, but he's maybe explaining that Ted's there, Lena's there, shalom, explaining something, because they're not supposed to be, they're supposed to wash themselves to be clean, to be purified. They're supposed to be clean, right? And then emissions, if you will, make someone unclean. And so people might be tempted, so he doesn't even want them to get close to even think about it. Don't, quote unquote, touch a woman. could be an idiom for something more involved than simply touching. And so you don't want to do that and become unclean again. You've got to be clean and ready on the third day. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder, lightning, and a thick cloud on the mountain. Then a shofar blast sounded. A shofar blast sounded, and it was so loudly that all the people in the camp trembled. Moshe brought the people out of the camp to meet God. Wow. They stood near the base of the mountain. Mount Sinai was enveloped in smoke because Adonai descended onto it in fire. He was in fire and surrounded by a thick cloud. So we've got another theme here, fire. Its smoke went up like the smoke of a furnace. The whole mountain shook violently. It sounds, a lot like a volcano or something, but it's not a volcano.
No.
It's only smoking because he's coming down upon it. It's not something coming out of this mountain.
Usually the smoke from a volcano is right at the top and going up into the air. It's not at the base.
Right. This, this in the Psalm, right? The mountains melt like wax in the presence of the Lord. Well, that's what's happening here. He's coming in fire, and it's actually melting the top of the mountain. As the sound of the shofar grew louder and louder, Moshe spoke, and God answered him with a voice. Adonai came down on Mount Sinai. And there's a lot of conjecture where Mount Sinai is these days, right? On the top of the mountain. Not just anywhere on the mountain, on the top. Then Adonai called Moshe from the top of the mountain, and Moshe went up. Adonai said to Moshe, go down and warn the people not to force their way through to Adonai to see him. If they do, many of them will perish. Is that if they force their way through the boundary, many of them perish, or if they see Adonai, right, that many of them will perish? Even the Kohanim who are allowed to approach Adonai must keep themselves holy, otherwise Adonai may break out against them. Moshe said to Adonai, the people can't come up to Mount Sinai because you ordered the set limits around the mountain to separate it, right? But why is Adonai saying that? You think he's saying it in vain, like without reason? No. Moshe can't see the people down there. Apparently, some people are thinking about it or planning it, or maybe even
have already started.
Getting
too close.
So Adonai answered him, get down, then come back up, you and Aharon with you. But don't let the Kohanim and the people force their way through to come up to Adonai, or he will break out against them. He's talking about him. Adonai is talking about Adonai. Isn't that interesting? Adonai is saying, but don't let the Kohanim and the people force their way through, or else Adonai, right, some other part or something of Adonai will break out against them. That's interesting, right? To some people, it's a more of a mystery. And now we're going to get to chapter 20. But before we start with chapter 20, where we get the words, I want to read a little bit of something, a note or two from the Chumash. I hope you can see it okay. It looks like you can. So this is not messianic. It's got a lot of good commentary, though, a lot of good notes. Sometimes they're not such good notes, some of them, but let's see. There's an interesting note here in the Chumash that says, as God told Moshe in Shemot, Exodus chapter 19, verse 9, the revelation at Sinai would cause the people to believe in him. Remember, we read that? The revelation at Sinai would cause the people to believe in him, and in later prophets as well. Why? For they would see and hear that God speaks to man. They would see it. Maybe there were prophets before, people before telling them God said this, God said that. but they didn't see it for themselves. They weren't there. Now the whole nation is there, and they can see that God speaks to man. And every member, this is still from the Chumash, every member of the nation experienced prophecy. You remember, if you were with us earlier today, I explained prophecy. It's not just predicting the future or something. Mm-hmm. It's relating the words of God to the people. And that's what prophecy is, the giving the words of God to the people. Well, God can obviously give his words to the people. And you're seeing that understanding given right here in the Chumash as well. The same understanding. Every member of the nation experienced prophecy during that unprecedented and unmatched event. Thus, they would never doubt that prophecy was a reality, that prophecy is real, that God does indeed speak to man. That was one thing I thought was very interesting. And there's another note here before we get into the 10 words. In the Chumash, mind you, Torah is one unified whole. This may sound familiar from some scripture in the Brit Chadashah, and if you know it, please go ahead and write it down there if it comes to you. To contend that one can abrogate even a single word of the Torah is not to affect the rest of the Torah as well, and is a heretical statement. You can't take part of the Torah and break what parts you want. You can't cherry pick your obedience to the Torah. If you break one part, you've broken it all. Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting story. Some commentators in the past have said that what was it again? Mechilta said that God uttered all of the 10 words, really just said in one instant, boom. And others said, well, yeah, but then the people didn't understand it was so fast. And so he said it again. The text doesn't say that. But that would go along with the idea that it's like it's one. I think that would be would feed into that understanding that all of the Torah is unified in one essence. So that's interesting, I would say. All right, now we're going to go to chapter 20, and this is Aleph. Different groups have numbered the commandments differently, right? And most of them, unless they're Jewish, they don't even get the first one. You'll see in the text an Aleph for one. This is the first one. It's not saying first verse. There was no verse numbers, no chapter numbers at the time. But the Aleph is there to tell us this is the first commandment, right? And it says, I am Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery, period. This is a commandment. Mm-hmm. In essence, you are to acknowledge that he is your God, that he is God, and you're not, right? He's the boss. And who is he? He's the one who brought us out of Egypt. Okay? That's Aleph. Now, we get into the others, you're going to come into this word lo. So here's Beit, it starts with verse 3, where you're not supposed to have any other gods before him, you're not supposed to have any representation of them, of anything, because God has no image, there's no form to him, his spirit, and yet there's some part of him that does, right? Because you see him in different places, wrestling with Jacob and whatnot. But God the Father has no form, he's spirit, and so you're not supposed to try to make a representation of him because it wouldn't be right. Some people justify making images of him, and as a matter of fact, the people of Israel did when Moshe was up on Mount Sinai, as a matter of fact. They built an image of a golden calf, and what did they say about the golden calf? They were saying that this is the God who brought us out of Egypt. They even identified it as Adonai. They were identifying their worship of the golden calf as worship of Adonai. Mm-hmm. And here's the second commandment. I'm Adonai. No, I don't have any forms or anything. So second command is don't build any images and worship them and bow down to them. Mm-hmm. It's not fitting. Okay, this is the second one. But I want to take a small break from that second commandment with the don't make, and it's all tied together. The second commandment, don't make any images and don't bow down to them, right? It's all fitting together. To talk to you really quick, some of you might have missed your Hebrew because it's been so long since we had a Hebrew class, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you don't. So if you don't want to hear anything about Hebrew, let me know and I'll stop. So put it in there. Oh, that's interesting. Hovered over a name and saw all kinds of information about the person. I didn't know you could do that. Okay. So the word low. So everyone, you can say low.
Low.
Right? And many of you know this is one of the negatives in Hebrew. There's low and there's ain, right? And so, well, let me show you. There's a couple of books. I'll give you some notes just on the word low. This one is by Mark Furtado. Give him some credit there. And in this one, you see something interesting. We talk about how Hebrew, how reading the Hebrew can give you a better sense of the message, right? How sometimes the syntax itself, like the way the sentence is put together, can show you, give you a deeper understanding. It can show you some revelation that maybe you didn't have before, right? And so here's an example for that. Again, it has to do with sentence structure, sentence order, or order of words. But it's a little different than just thrusting something to the front. When you use the word low, generally it's going to be the first word in the sentence. And the thing that's being negated, the thing that you're saying no or not to, is the thing that's going to be right after the low in the Hebrew. Now you'll still translate it the same way in English, whatever is going to go next to the low, whatever being negated, really doesn't matter. In the Hebrew, you're going to see it the same way. I don't know if I can hold this up, if you can see. I can try, I guess, before I read them, or maybe I could read it first and then hold it up, right?
Yeah.
So, lo shalach ha'av et hasus. The father did not send the horse. Okay? Now, lo shalach means the word being negated is shalach or shalach, not shalich, but shalach would be biblical Hebrew, shalach would be modern Hebrew, right? For sending, or he sent. And the one who sent is ha'av, the father sent, but it's negated with the lo, right? So the father did not send. But where the emphasis is on send, so he did not send et hasus, the horse. Et tells us that it's not the subject, it's the object. So we know because of the et, which one is the subject, it's the father. The father did not send the horse. So the emphasis is he didn't send the horse. Now, why is it important to know that? Let me see. I don't know. Can we see that?
You might want to put it behind. Yeah,
Yeah,
there you go.
Can they see?
Maybe put
You see what it says?
closer
The
to
father
camera.
did not send the horse. So if the father did not send the horse, what does that mean? Or what does it not mean? Maybe he, instead of sending the horse in context, he kept the horse. Or maybe he didn't send the horse, someone stole it.
Horse, yeah.
Right?
Somebody
Or maybe he
else
didn't
sent it.
send the horse, but the horse ran away. Those are the kind of things you would get from that emphasis. There's three emphases here, so you stick with me. If you don't like this, we'll be gone from it in a minute, right? The second one, okay, is lo ha'av shalach et hasus. Okay, so instead of shalach being right next to lo, ha'av is next to lo. And what's ha'av? The father, right? So now it's the English is still the same. The father, and I'm emphasizing father though because it's the word next to lo. The father did not send the horse. And what does that tell us? Why is that emphasized? If the father did not send the horse, maybe it's telling us Maybe the mother sent the horse.
Or the brother, or the
Or the
sister,
son sent
or
the horse.
the grandfather, somebody, yeah.
Right, somebody else sent the horse, not the father.
Mm-hmm.
You with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And then the third one is lo et Jesus shalach ha'av. So now instead of the father or being emphasized, or shalach, sent, being emphasized, et Jesus is thrust to the front, but not all the way to the front. It's after lo. It's saying the horse is the thing being negated. So the father did not send the horse. And what would that be telling us? He sent something, but he didn't send the horse.
Maybe he sent the camel or the donkey or.
Right. Maybe he sent the garment that's on the horse. He didn't want you to have the horse. He's giving you the garment on the horse. Right? Maybe something like that. Okay, so that's a little bit about lo. And you can't get that in all three instances. Let me hold it up again for you. In all three of these instances, you will see, tell me if they can see it okay.
Put it a little closer to the camera. Yeah.
In all three instances, look at the English. You see, the Hebrew is a different order in each case, with the word being negated, thrust forward to where the lo, to right after the lo. But the English is the same in every instant. So you're not getting the emphasis of the lo. Do you see that? I hope y'all could see that.
It looked pretty clear from the camera here.
Now, I don't know if that was interesting to you or not, but I figure lo is a big word today. So we're going to look at.
And Toda Keith for sharing that information.
What's that? Oh, he put it in Hebrew. Oh, Denise did too up there.
Yeah, but he shared this too.
Oh. Yeah, Furtado. Oh, so he's a great scholar. As a matter of fact, he is a linguistic. His doctorate is in linguistics, and so he's one that can tell you, like, a lot of these things we see are just ridiculous on the internet, but really no one knows what the real name is, and that includes the Yahweh thing. He will tell you, as a Christian too, biblical scholar, with his doctorate in linguistics, that part of that makeup, when they say it that way, part of the makeup is from one era, and the back end of the word is from a different era. You're mixing time periods together. It doesn't make sense. It's probably the best, one of the better guesses out there, but it's not right. Okay, so this is a book we'll look at now for just a little bit more about lo before we move on and talk about the commandments, right? This one by Pratico and Van Pelt. Okay, and this is a totally different information about lo. I hope I'm not boring you. Please tell me if I am. And again, we'll move on. Okay, but this one is more to the point of when we look at the commandments this time. Okay, yeah, it's like, I'm tired of that book because I just finished Hebrew 1 and Hebrew 2. And that is that in the 10 words, in the Decalogue, it's also called a Decalogue. I don't know if anybody answered that question earlier. The 10 words is the 10 Commandments, most commonly known as. It's also called the Decalogue. In the Decalogue, in the 10 words, the combination of lo instead of ain, lo, plus the imperfect for verbs is used for an absolute or permanent prohibition. Now, lo isn't always that way. Lo with the perfect verb is like past tense. So I guess that's kind of permanent too. You can't go back in time and change it if something didn't happen, right? I guess that's kind of permanent too, actually. Might have to put more thought into that. But in the sense of going into the future, the imperfect going into the future, you will not ever do this. Lo with an imperfect verb is talking about a permanent or absolute prohibition, wherein the al, which is aleph and lamed, you reverse the order, lo aleph or aleph lamed, right, is used with an imperfect verb to express an immediate or specific or non-durative prohibition. A temporary prohibition would be al, where lo would be permanent with an imperfect verb, and that part's important, right? Okay, so let me give you a couple examples, so maybe it'll help understand, right? So the al, the temporary type, would be used, for example, in Bereshit, Genesis 15:1, where it says el tira, el tira, okay, or in modern Hebrew, al tira, right? And so that's do not fear, do not fear. So he's not saying don't ever fear anything, right? But in a particular instance, a particular circumstance, something's happening here in Bereshit 15:1, and the person who normally would be afraid is being told, do not fear. Okay? And here's a good one, right? Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah 27:16. Al tishma'u el divrei Naviechem, okay? So think about the repercussions if this was permanent. Do not listen to the words of your prophets, okay? That would be a problem. The prophets, like we said, prophets prophesy, they give you the word of God. But these prophets in this particular context apparently were false prophets. And so don't listen to those prophets, right? And that would be, again, an immediate or specific or, temporary. But lo with the imperfect is what we're seeing in the Decalogue. And that is not temporary. The Ten Commandments, right, are permanent. I just want you to understand that. The Hebrew construction is showing us that these are permanent. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you were bored, don't worry about it. We're done with that part. I hope some of you enjoyed it anyway. All right. Getting some comments today. That's good. Looks like it's been a little while, though. Maybe I put them to sleep. I'm not sure. Okay, so let's go ahead with the third one. You are not, the Complete Jewish Bible reads it like this. You are not to use lightly the name of Adonai, your God. And of course, when we say Adonai here, we're using a circumlocution. It's the four-letter name it means that we're using a word in place of the name of God, out of respect for the name of God, which interestingly is the point here. Do not use lightly the name of Adonai your God, because Adonai will not leave unpunished someone who uses his name lightly. Think about our culture today. Even though, here's the thing though, they're not really using the name, right?
No.
Well, that's good for them at least, but still, I don't know. There's other names for God are still names for God, so they're still sort of, even though it's not the name, and this is specifically talking about the name, it's still showing disrespect for God. And that's kind of the point here. Let me read you again from the Chumash a couple of ideas that are shared there about this commandment. It has a lot to do, or it's very closely associated with the idea of vain oaths, because you make oaths in the name of Adonai. We're told to make our oaths, not make oaths, lightly, and certainly not to make them in the name of any other gods or something, right? So this is closely associated with not making vain oaths. In here it says, it is forbidden to show contempt for God. Make sense? It is forbidden to disgrace his name by using it for no valid purpose. For no valid purpose. All right? So the plain meaning of the verse implies that it's forbidden even to utter God's name. So after in the first century, they kind of put a period there. But no, even to utter God's name casually. All right? For no valid purpose. That's from Rambam. All right. Now that's also interesting because we just finished reading the book of Ruth, and I don't know if you did. I took my orange highlighter and we went through the book of Ruth, and I highlighted times when you see in greetings people using the name Adonai in the first person. It's quotations of people using his name in their conversation. as greetings coming in and out of the field, or making a vow,
Mm-hmm.
or things like that, or making a blessing. They would actually say his name, not saying Adonai, not using a circumlocution. Does that mean circumlocutions are bad? Of course not. When Adonai gives his name to Moshe in the same passage in Shemot earlier on, of course, um, Adonai calls him Moshe calls him Adonai in that same chapter. And God doesn't say, don't use a circumlocution, I will smite thee. No, it's okay to use a circumlocution, especially one that's fitting like Adonai, which is my masters. It's actually plural, kind of like Elohim. Okay, so don't use it for no valid purpose. So the sages say that the commandment forbids the use of the name to validate either of two varieties of vain oaths. You might think that's kind of boring, but let me explain to you two types of vain oaths. To swear that a wooden object is wood, right? So this is like, it's so obvious. Why would you need to swear to something that's just so obvious?
Mm-hmm.
It's a piece of wood. Everyone knows it's a piece of wood. Don't bother using his name to swear that this is a piece of wood. Does that make sense? Okay, the other one is to swear that an obviously wooden object is gold. That would also be vain, right? And showing disrespect for his name, to make a false oath, a vain oath because it's false. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. For Hashem will not absolve, okay? Kilo, Yina, that's so small. Yina, Ka Hashem. Allah will not absolve. When someone uses God's name to validate an oath, it is as if the person says that his word is as good as God's existence. Are you with me? Are you guys still with me? I don't see any comments there. Can you hear me okay? When you make, when you use God's name in validating an oath, it's as if you're saying that your word is as true as God's existence. For him to violate this oath, therefore, or to trivialize it, as in those examples, right, shows that he holds God in contempt, and therefore God will not absolve him. And this is from the sages. So it goes with what's this. In this case, the sages are going very closely with what the text says, which was what? You're not to use lightly the name of Adonai your God, because Adonai will not leave unpunished someone who uses his name lightly. All right. We good with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Too much?
Mm-mm.
Okay. No, not too much fire. Okay. Oh, we got a wow. So that's interesting. Thanks, Michael. Okay. And we'll go to the next one. Number 4. All right. Who remembers how we say remember? What the root is for remember? That's all right. Like Yom HaZikaron, Day of Remembrance. Remember Zacher, that sort of thing. Okay, so remember the day Shabbat. Shabbat is like a memorial, a day of memorial. It's not Memorial Day. We're not remembering the dead soldiers or something, but it's a different kind of Memorial Day. It's a day to remember Shabbat, to set it apart for God. Why is it a memorial? You have 6 days to labor to do all your work, but the 7th day, which day?
7th.
It's not the first day?
No.
Not the 8th day?
No. There is
Not
no
the 4th day?
No.
The 7th day is a Shabbat for Adonai your God. On it is talking about Shabbat. On Shabbat, you are not to do any kind of work.
Any kind of work.
Again, remember, this has a low. It is permanent. You are not to do any kind of work. Not you. And that doesn't mean, well, I won't work, but I'll give my work to the kids. They'll do it for me. No, not your son or your daughter. Well, maybe I'll just have the people that work for me. I have them do my stuff, and I'll take the day off. No, not. And the word for slave is the same as servant, by the way. Also, there's male or female slave or servant. Not your livestock. Well, I'll just let them. I'll have the plow hooked up to the animals the night before, and I'll just have them go run through the fields and Who knows what the lines will look like? They'll be all screwy, but at least there'll be something loud. Maybe the ground will be more. No, not your livestock. Well, there was an interesting thing. Some Jewish people have let's call it a Shabbos goy, right? A Gentile who will come and help them on Shabbat when they can't do things like cook, will come and cook for them or something,
Or
right?
light the fire.
No, not the foreigner staying with you inside the gates to your property. Well, that's someone who lives with you. So that's once we'll get away from it, they'll say, "Oh, but he doesn't live with me within the gates to your property." Well, you're really playing with fire. We're not supposed to. I remember a message from a pastor friend of mine once talking about people trying to, in their attitude towards God's commandments. And he related it to a story about the stagecoach. And some of you know this story, so bear with me for a minute. Some of you know the story that there was a guy trying to hire a new driver for a stagecoach. Remember this? And so he had a test for them. 3 people were applying, and he sent each one out in turn to drive the stagecoach up this mountain and then back down again. And the first guy took off, and he rode that stagecoach as fast as he could to the top of the mountain and back down again, right? And it was like very impressive, very impressive. And the second guy took the stagecoach, and he went out like he knew he had to beat this guy. So he went out even faster, and he was turning corners to like one of the back wheels would go off the edge and stuff as he's turning sharp corners and barely keeping the stagecoach on the mountain as he's going up and down, right? Now the third driver had a whole different attitude, a whole different outlook. When it was his turn, he got on the stage, right, and drove the stagecoach nice and slow and safe up the mountain and back down the mountain. Which one of them do you think you would hire if it's your stagecoach?
John Wayne on the stagecoach. I would hire the third guy.
Yeah, that's what happened. He hired the third guy. He hired the third guy. It's not, speed is not the most important thing. No one cares how fast you fell off the mountain. They want to actually get their mail. Right?
Well, and if it's a stagecoach, there's people on it.
There could be people on it. There could be payrolls on it. All kinds of important things on the stagecoach, and they're more important than the incredible speed, if you will. Its safety would be more important, right?
Yep.
The parallel is, do some people act that way with God's commandments? They try to get away with anything they can. When they're going up the mountain, are their wheels coming off the edge? Are they testing the limits to see what they can get away with? Or are they doing their best, right, to stay within the parameters that God has put in place to keep us safe? You get it? I'm a big John Wayne fan too, by the way. Woody. So anyway, it's Holly. What is? Let's see here. So, so the reason we're doing Shabbat. Look at verse 11. The reason that we remember Shabbat and set it apart is in verse 11. For, remember the word ki? For or because. Ki kadosh right? Okay, so for or because in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth, the heavens and earth, the sea and everything in them. Because there's no singular heaven in Hebrew.
Nope.
The sea and everything in them. But on the 7th day, he rested. And so, see, we're supposed to work for 6,000 years and then rest for that. What do you mean, no? Oh, you mean
A
it's like
year is a
literally
year
a
and a day is a day. Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Because I was really looking forward to taking 1,000 years off. Anyway,
Well, if you live to be that old, then you can take 1,000 years off.
there is kind of a messianic age of 1,000 years coming, whatever. But
Yeah.
this is talking about days, 6 days, and taking the seventh one off, seventh day off.
Mhm.
That's why we're working 6 days is a parallel and taking the seventh day off.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, that's what it says next. This is why Adonai blessed the day Shabbat and separated it for himself.
Mhm.
Okay.
And if God took time to rest on the seventh day, we should take time.
Right.
Because
So
He's God and we're human.
this idea, I think someone mentioned here, the idea, what is work? What is work? If we're not supposed to work on the seventh day, what exactly is work? Well, the root word here, you have to look it up, but this is, if I remember correctly, was the word for like occupational work. Okay, but
Mhm.
there are certain things that are beyond that we're told not to do. We see not to gather sticks to build a fire. A guy was stoned for that.
Mhm.
We're not to light fire on Shabbat, and apparently not even to gather the sticks to do it. Right? We see in Nehemiah. Go ahead.
When they were in the desert and they got man from heaven,
Mhm.
on the sixth day they were supposed to collect enough for the seventh day, because if they went out and collected on the seventh day, it rotted.
Right. And so what would
They
that
were
be?
not
Like
supposed-
collecting food or gathering food. And what we call gathering food, like harvesting
Mhm.
food. Right? Right. So no harvesting. And the rabbis got together because this was an interesting question to them. I mean, we want to do the follow commandments right. So they came up with all these big categories. I think they overdid it though. They came up with all these massive categories of work based on what was done to create the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and all the different kinds of work that were done to build
Mhm.
the Mishkan. And and some of this actually came up with Yeshua later on, right? So we came up with Yeshua. Uh, one of the things we read about is it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath day.
Mhm.
And that was with
Mhm.
healing a man, if I remember correctly.
Yes, with the shriveled hand.
Healing.
Right?
And this is the understanding in Rabbinic Judaism today. Like, this is why the army works on Shabbat now. Yom Kippur War helped come to that understanding. That's a different kind of Shabbat, but we were attacked on Yom Kippur. There's also, during the days of Josephus and in the days of the Maccabees, people attacked us on the weekly Shabbat, and they would massacre many
Mhm.
people because the army wasn't working. Um, and so now the army works on Shabbat. Also, the medical personnel, the doctors and the nurses
Mhm.
work on Shabbat. Maybe there's a lighter workforce, right? Skeleton crew, if you will. That's what term we used in the military, right?
Yeah.
But nevertheless, those are crucial, important jobs. And in life is the most important thing. When there's a conflict of commandments against each other, then maintaining life or saving life is more important. For example, if it's Shabbat and you come across an animal stuck in a ditch, and even if it's a big old ox or a donkey, and you have to get it out of the ditch to for the sake of its life. Even if you were just walking a short distance to go to Shabbat, now you got to stop. You got to get this big animal out of a ditch and figure out who it belongs to and take it back to them. Right?
Mhm.
So if it's Shabbat, which one do you do? Do you do all this work getting the animal out, or do you, just preserve its life, or do you just pass on by like the Kohanim and like the Levite, leaving the Samaritan laying there dying, so you can
Mhm.
get to service? Again, it's life is preeminent. That's the one uh, that you would go with, is preserving or saving life.
Mhm.
Makes sense?
Firefighters and police officers work on Shabbat too.
Right. And also in Judaism, the circumcision. If it's the 8th day, you're going to do the work of circumcising an individual, and that's even written within Judaism, and it was at the time already a practice, and Yeshua noted it. The work of circumcision, you do it on the 8th day, and it's marring the image of God, marring a person's image. Yeah, it's fulfilling a commandment, but it's marring the image. And here, what he was doing was making a person whole on Shabbat. Which one of those two is better? Healing. And again, so now this argument is moot. There were some Perushim who were arguing the point, but now, like I said, hospitals are open in Israel, and it's not something the Orthodox are against. It's acknowledged.
No, because
it's the right thing to do.
If you have a heart attack on Shabbat, you're going to want to get help,
right.
Or your family is going to want to get help for you.
So even driving, you turn. If the hotel we were going to go, we're not going now to Israel in June. Our flight was canceled and everything. So, but if you go to Israel, the hotel we were going to stay at was one that's a good one for people who are Sabbath observant. And that, what do I mean? If it has multiple floors and you have an elevator, on Shabbat in Israel, they set the elevator to stop on its own at every floor and open the. So it could take a long time to get to the bottom floor if you're way on the top, because it's stopping at every single floor, or to get back up later, it's stopping at every single floor. But at least you're not breaking Shabbat because it's doing it on its own, right? Rather than you hitting the button, there's like an ignition, there's like a mini controlled fire. Just like in your car, when you turn your ignition, there's a mini controlled fire. You're not supposed to start a fire on Shabbat, is what they say, right? But what about the commandment to assemble on Shabbat? If your congregation is so far from you that you have to drive a car to get there, what are you supposed to do? Well, even in Rabbinic Judaism, you talk to some Orthodox rabbis, it depends. Some, there's always different views. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. But even some Orthodox Jews, rabbis will say, when confronted, is it more important for them not to turn the ignition in the car or to fulfill the commandment to assemble, to have a holy convocation on Shabbat? And they will say it's more important to have the holy convocation. Again, that one's a battle for some. It could go either way. Depends where you're going. Yeshua saw one. We were talking about harvesting, right? With the man, we associate it with harvest. He was walking through the fields to Talmudim. They're just rubbing their hands, getting something to eat while they're going through the field. Well, some, this isn't like the position of all the Perushim at the time, but some said, hey, you can't do that. That's against the Torah. Well, it wasn't against the Torah. It was against the fence around the Torah, all those categories and all those rules that the rabbis, the sages at that time they were called, had made around, well, I think by the time it was written, they were called rabbis already, had written around and specifying what they considered to be work. But the Torah said harvesting, you will not put a sickle to the grain. Sickle, big, large implement, which you use to do labor, to collect all the stuff from a field. It's very different from rubbing your hand and eating stuff as you're walking through the field. Yeshua's saying that's not harvesting.
Nope.
You see, there's difference. He's saying that's not harvesting. And I think he would venture to say at the same time, because in a very strict sense, you might say, well, they're getting food, it's in the field, it's harvesting. I think that's the same kind of spirit that would say, you're turning the key in your car, you're starting a fire. You know what I mean? I think he would agree with the idea, to go to service, you could. But, hey, I don't, people who would say differently on those issues, I wouldn't say think differently than Yeshua, and I would say that's the same spirit. But if you see things differently with the starting the car, there's ignition, fire, whatever, well, that's fine. I'm fine with that. I wouldn't go against someone for trying their best to follow God's commandments. Does that make sense? Just like, well, we won't go into more of that. We have to get through the rest of these, right? And it's already been an hour. Maybe we won't get to Acts. I'm sorry, everybody. Okay, so the next one, hey. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is hey, right? Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, hey. Okay, So these ones are much more self-explanatory. Honor your father and mother, or are they? What do you do to honor your father and mother?
You obey them.
Well, that's one thing. But is that the only thing?
No, you take care of them in their old age, possibly.
Okay. What else? Give me ways. Go ahead and write them down. How can you honor your father and mother?
You help them.
Help them.
Like with housework or yard work, or
someone slandering your father or mother.
You stand up to them and say, no, don't do that.
Your father or mother dies.
You do their funeral.
Make sure they have a proper funeral.
Or burial, depending on what your views on that are.
And what else do you do with the funeral?
You say kind words about them.
You talk kindly.
Memories. You talk about good memories.
Good memories. You honor them. Right? Oh, Michael says, appreciate talking about this. Good.
You don't talk bad about them to your friends.
Don't talk bad about them. Right. Absolutely. Do you steal from them?
No.
That would not be honoring them, would it? That's two commandments you'd be breaking. If you're stealing and you're doing it from someone you're supposed to be honoring.
Don't talk back. Like if they say, hey, go clean your room, they'll say, I'm not going to do that. And,
And there's a reason why you honor your father and mother, so that you may live long in the land which Adonai your God is giving you. So to some degree, in an extreme degree, you can see, remember there's a commandment about when there's a youth that's so unruly, they will not listen to you. And you get to the point where and you can see some youth today who are like this. Youth who do just abominable things, just horrid things, raping grandmothers in their home and things like that, or something. And you look at our system of supposed justice, and the perpetrator is not even punished, or punished very, very lightly, and this sort of thing. This sort of heinous things that children are capable of, if unrestrained, is just mind-boggling.
Well, we take
that. And the Torah has a way. The Torah has a way to fix that. A way that certain politicians may have mocked in the past, but it works. And that is, if there is a perceived understanding that if you go too far, your parents can take you to the city gate, to the elders of your community, and say, can't handle him anymore. He's totally out of control. That you could actually be stoned to death for being that way. If such a consequence exists, I think if it were me, I would not be that way. I wouldn't be that way anyway. But if I was that way, then I would change, because I would not want to go through that, right?
Well, sadly, in today's society, not with everybody, but there's a lot of people that are like, there's no consequences for their actions.
Right.
And we
just finished, a book that's talking about, in Hebrews, talking about disciplining a child is the right thing to do. And when they're talking about that, we're talking about, things like spanking and whatnot. That's the kind of discipline we're talking about. At least having the ability to do it. And there's some ridiculous thinking out there these days that gives a child the impression, the understanding that there are no consequences for doing wrong.
Yeah.
And I think part of it comes from one of the liberal ideas that there is no such thing as good and evil. I don't know if you knew that. That's one of the ideas floating around in universities these days. Anywho, so you can see, though, where that penalty, that consequence would be tied to this command: honor your father and mother so that you can live long in the land. If you totally are disrespectful to your father and mother, and not paying attention to anything they tell you commandment-wise, for example, from the Torah even, then you're that unruly, they may take you to the gate. Right? That should not be done frivolously, and I don't believe it would be. When you take someone to the elders, that implies there's a case, that's a court. a court case. So it was never something that was meant to be done lightly.
Oh no, it
Right.
was like the last resort.
Okay, Numbers, verse 13, do not murder.
That's pretty plain and
Now,
simple.
really, the word in Hebrew is the same word for kill. So why do we say murder? There are times when God tells people to kill in the Tanakh, to go to war, to wipe out the people in the land of Canaan,
Mm-hmm.
right? The word that can mean either or is obviously by context meaning murder. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Is it permissible to draw your conclusion based on draw your own conclusion beyond their opinion about life choice? Well, you need to make your decisions. You have your understanding be firmly rooted within the Scripture, and that means considering from the Torah and from what Yeshua says and his explanations of them. So don't take it upon yourself to go beyond what the Torah says in one direction or the other, right? There were issues in the day of Yeshua that he addressed. And so we have more insight. He filled it full. He filled the Torah full. He lived it out the way it should be lived out for us to help us get a better understanding of how to do things. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Moving on. We're losing people. The later it gets, we're down.
Yeah.
Because it's 9:30 now. That's not so late. We started at 8:30.
No, but
Oh, well.
some people
Gotta
may
work
need to get up
tomorrow
in the
or
morning or
something.
something. Yeah.
Okay, there's only a few left, and they're short ones. Do not commit adultery. I think we all know what adultery is here. Are the all adults out there? You know what adultery is, I think. You know, what's a good word to use? Relations outside of marriage
Mm-hmm.
of a promiscuous manner. How's that? That work to describe it? Okay. And do not steal. Do not steal. That's pretty self-explanatory. Take things that are not yours, right? And do not give false evidence against your neighbor or false. This is a complete Jewish Bible version. Don't be a false witness. Don't give false evidence, and don't right. So don't be a false witness. Don't lie. You know, there are people who are. There's a sense that many people have to do all they can for the poor. And that's great to some degree, but you don't go beyond what is true, actual justice. Does that make sense? In other words, you don't lie, you don't commit sins in order to do it. You don't give injustice against the other person in order to do it. Does that make sense? Because that's not justice, that's injustice, but it's just in a different direction. You're not supposed to give preference to anyone. Right. You don't turn your back on the poor, but you also don't give preference, over someone else in a court case just because they're rich or just because they're poor. Does that make sense? There are, if you're the judge, however, there are, when we talk about stealing, there you can see that there's a different penalty for someone who's stealing if it's just in order to feed their family.
Right.
If they're desperate and they're trying to feed their family, there's a lesser penalty for that in the Torah. God understands things like that. It doesn't mean he said that it's okay.
No.
There still is a penalty, but it's a lower penalty. Does that make sense? And it's a penalty that shouldn't even exist because in the Torah it says we're supposed to help the poor. And they shouldn't, and if everyone did that, there wouldn't be any poor. If everyone did their part, and doing their part means more than just giving a little here and there. People can provide jobs, can provide training for jobs, as well as people giving food. Different people have different abilities with which they can help in different ways, right? Okay, so these are kind of blending together. Now, don't steal, don't give false witness, false testimony. This would happen to Yeshua, right? False testimony.
Yeah.
Do not, and the last one, do not covet your neighbor's house. Do not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female slave or servant. In today's language, well, there is still slavery in Islamic countries, so slaves, I guess, there too. His ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Don't be, how would you describe coveting? Don't be lusting after things that don't belong to you.
Oh, that's a really nice boat.
Well, you can admire a boat or something, but don't be like lusting after it. And that's how, which king was Ahav, right? Got in trouble, his wife Jezebel, right? Taking someone else's having someone else killed because the king wanted the vineyard. It was convenient. That's really a great vineyard, and it's right here by the palace. I wish I could have that vineyard. And she's like, "You're the king. What are you doing?" And she arranged to have the guy murdered so the king could get the vineyard. Coming from this attitude, right, of covetousness. So don't covet.
David and Bathsheba too.
Right. All the people experienced this is perfect because we just heard thunder. All the people experienced the thunder, the lightning, the sound of the shofar, the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they trembled, stood at a distance. They said to Moshe, "You're speaking with us. You speak with us and we'll listen, but don't let God speak us with us or we'll die." That's how terrifying it was that they would say something like this. Imagine how violently the earth was shaking, how scary the situation was, that they would say something like this.
And hearing the shofar.
And Moshe answered the people, "Don't be afraid because God has come." This is don't be afraid. It's not saying, so this would be the Al Tirah, right? The Al, not a permanent, don't ever be afraid of anything, but don't be afraid right now. Don't be afraid in this situation because God has come only to test you and to make you fear him. It's interesting. Don't fear because he's come to make you fear him. So that you won't commit sins. He wants to instill an understanding of just how powerful he is, just the majesty. You want to respect what he says. You should respect God, revere God, and understand who it is you're messing with and you're disrespecting when you go against his commandments. So the people stood at a distance, but Moshe approached the thick darkness where God was. Adonai said to Moshe, "Here's what you're to say to the people of Israel. You yourself have seen that I spoke with you from heaven." Right? We saw that theme earlier. You yourselves have seen that I spoke with you from heaven. Therefore, they believe that there's such a thing as prophecy, that God does speak to man. You are not to make with me gods of silver. You're not to make gods of gold for yourselves, right? Which they do when he goes up the mountain with the calf we talked about already.
Yeah.
For me, you need only make an altar of earth. On it, you will sacrifice your burnt offerings, peace offerings, sheep, goats, and cattle, whatever you're offering, basically. In every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you, etc., etc. So, those are the 10 words. I know there's more. We could cover more with them, but we've gone already over an hour. And how many of you want to hear a little more? Anybody want to go to Acts, or do you think you had enough? Have you had enough? Let's have a vote.
Well, there's a 10-second
Are you
delay.
sleeping already? Yeah, 10-second delay. So, but yes, the Torah is not, the Word of God is not subjective. So it's not something we just on our own come up with. Our decisions, our understandings should be based on the Scripture and flow from the Scripture as tightly as possible, if that makes sense. And I think it does.
Well, there's one.
There's one. I think Lucasita was hoping for all-night Torah study. Am I right? Well, she asked if we're having one, and I didn't know if that meant she took tomorrow off and she wants one, or if she was thinking that she couldn't do that and just wanted to know. I'm not sure. Thunder and lightning. More, please, Zimraz. Too.
More would be fantastic.
The more would be fantastic. Oh, I'd like to hear that. That's awesome. So, um, okay, so maybe the audience is dwindling down, but the people who are here want some more. So maybe we should do that then. So we're going to flip over. We were talking about
Angie
the Torah.
said, me too.
Hey, all right. We're getting people actually putting in some chat this time. Usually the YouTube guys are really quiet. A little bit last couple, weeks, a little bit lucecita.
Ted Corley says more.
But, oh, awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, then.
So you said Acts, right?
So we're going to Acts. And we'll start with, guess where? There's this major event that happened on Shavuot. And Shavuot is first fruits. We had the first fruits of barley, which was Bikurim, where Yeshua was raised up, the first of the first fruits. And then we have another first fruits that happens. There was a first fruits of barley, the literal first fruits. Then he was a first fruit spiritually. And then we see 50 days later, we have a first fruits of a different type of grain, the wheat. And that's when Shavuot is. You're supposed to be counting the Omer, counting the collection of wheat that you're harvesting so that you can bring your tithe to the temple. This is one of the times. Shavuot is a time when you bring your tithe of wheat to the temple. So it's a good time for tithing. This is part of why we made giving a major thing with our counting of the Omer. We made it all about charities. Each week we had a charity. And by the way, so this week's charity, which is over now, but you can still do it because sun's down. You can still do it was ICR, the Institute for Creation Research. That's who we're giving to this week. Whoever gives for charity this week, that's what it'll go to. And then, but that was for Sunday, the last day. So we had a charity each week. But today, Shavuot, we're doing one last one. You see it on your charts. If you have the chart for counting the Omer, is for the UMJA, our umbrella group. They don't ask for a lot. They ask for very little. Some groups you join, they want like 10% of everything that comes in, or even more. Some much more, and they ask for very, very little. And they're a great group, and we get a lot of good teaching from them. They bless us a lot, and so we thought we'd take a little offering for them, the group that we belong to, and see what they can, and see what they can do with it. It's like going. It's like with the tithe, in the way that people gave to the Levites, the Levi'im, and then the Levi'im they tithe to the Kohanim. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of what we're doing here. We're this charity that we're getting, and we're giving up to a higher level to the UMJA, to our umbrella organization. I'm not sure if that made sense.
Kind of like the middleman.
But but leaders tithe too, and leaders also give to charity too. Not exempt from that or something. Everyone is supposed to do these things. So we do. Anyway, so we're going on to Acts 2 because something else happens here. Yeshua had been raised on the first fruits, the Bikurim, and he stayed with his Talmidim for 40 days before going up back to the heavens. And during those 40 days, he spoke to them about the kingdom of heaven. It was, it's going to come, obviously. Scripture talks about it everywhere. All the prophets talked about it. It's talked about it in the Brit Chadashah. You see that in Revelation, for example. And so the last question they ever asked him before he went back up was, Master, Adonai, or Adon, whichever one they used there, probably, are you at this time, that's the key phrase, at this time, going to restore self-rule or restore the kingdom, which they're already in, the land, so it's self-rule would make it the kingdom of Israel at this time. It's not about his answer isn't, you silly guys, I told you for 40 days now, you're not going to get the kingdom back again. It's a whole different thing now. Well, there are some scriptures that talk about this kingdom of God is like the spiritual entity at the same time, and it's broken into the world, and it's going to keep expanding. It's expanding from Jerusalem, and there's a spiritual sense, but there's also a literal fulfilling of this returning of the kingdom of Israel as well. You see it in Jerusalem. He's going to return to the earth, and he's going to rule and reign over the earth from Jerusalem, and from a new Jerusalem, as a matter of fact. So there are levels of fulfillment to those prophecies, and it will happen that the kingdom will be restored. But the answer is, you don't need to know when it's going to happen. He just says you don't need to know when it's going to happen. It is going to happen, right? But we don't know.
We should be prepared for the happening.
Yeah. And we should be prepared. Okay, so we come to Acts 2. Anyway, they went up at some Mount of Olives is where they went. It was interestingly enough, it was a Shabbat walk distance, right, from the Mount of Olives to Jerusalem, and that's where they went, and that's where he went up. And so they walked back from the Mount of Olives, the Shabbat walk, to this upstairs room where they were staying, right, afterwards. And they devoted themselves to prayer, and there were a lot of women there and everything. He talks about identifies some of them, and there were 120 of them there. It wasn't down to like the 12. There's 120 still there. Kepha, that's his real name, Shimon, right? Shimon Kepha. Kepha was a new name given to him. He was still Shimon at the same time. Stood up and addressed his fellow believers, and he's talking about, and they come up with, they need to replace the one Talmud that had gone against Yeshua, whose name was Yehuda or Judah. And you see in English, via the Greek, this changed like Judas, which is interesting because it's the same name as Judah or Yehuda in both cases. Like Jonas is Jonah, right? Yonah, actually. So anyway, they replace him, and they do the replacing, and they drew lots to do this. It's very interesting. You see, God can work through things like that. He can work through, lay out the fleece to get the right answer. He can work through the Urim and the Thummim in the temple, right? And he can work through drawing lots. These are people who had been with Yeshua the whole time he's here, and yet they're asking questions and getting an answer by drawing lots. They're not just drawing lots. You know what I mean? They're praying first. God, give us the answer. And then drawing the lots, right? They're not just saying, okay, whoever gets the short stick, that's who we'll pick, and that's it. You know what I mean? No, they had criteria, and they prayed about it because they recognize God is in control of everything. Sometimes we think He's only in control of the big things. He only cares about the big things, but He's in control of every little thing. He sees everything, He knows everything, and He's in control of everything. Doesn't mean He necessarily makes you make good choices, bad choices. We have, there's a balance here, free will, but He does orchestrate, lead. He can, when you pray, He can work and change the hearts of leaders of the world and change outcomes in the world and give peace. When it seems like there shouldn't, it couldn't be possible, for example, or make enemies just turn and leave, right? Anyway. All right, so now we come to chapter 2. The festival of Shavuot arrived. And look, it has. It's dark out.
It's here.
It has arrived. And all the believers, so I hope you got your cheesecake there. That's what you're supposed to eat.
Oh, man.
Cheesecake.
You didn't give us any.
I know, you're not supposed to tell everybody, though. We don't have any cheesecake. It's all my fault.
Yep.
I was the one that went to the store.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so dairy products like cheese blintzes. We've got cheese though. Um, you know, not quite the same apparently.
Not even
And
close.
so, you know, cheese, dairy products. We've got milk as well. Whatever.
Almond milk.
Yeah, it's almond milk, so it's not really dairy, is it?
Nope.
I don't think almond milk counts as dairy.
Nuts are not dairy.
Whatever. What are you gonna do? The cheese is still there. Can't tell me. Yeah, oh, totally. Okay, so and of course the 2 loaves of challah we also don't have because it's way too much challah for us.
Yeah,
but if we're
for
meeting
two
as a
people.
congregation, we would definitely have the 2 loaves of challah to represent what? Anyone?
We'd also have some really good homemade cheesecake.
She's changing the subject because she can't think. I don't know why you can't think. The 2 loaves of challah, the 2 tablets.
Mm-hmm.
You know. Anyway, you also do that on Shabbat because the double portion represent. But that's not Torah. That's tradition. That's tradition. So we're not in trouble with God. I'm just in trouble with her about the cheesecake. What we also have though is ice cream. Right?
Yeah, that's dairy.
Yeah. And I think it's like fudge ice cream too.
It's chocolate peanut butter.
Yeah, but let's get more serious here. So on Shavuot arrived, and the
Serious.
and the brethren, the believers all gathered together in one place. Suddenly, there came a sound from the sky like the roar of a violent wind. If you remember from Shemot, there's a violent wind. And it filled the whole house where they were sitting. Okay, this is a different scene. Shavuot. Shavuot is a pilgrimage festival, one of 3. There's Pesach, there's Shavuot, and there's Sukkot. Those are the 3. When all male Jews are supposed to come wherever you live to Jerusalem, anywhere in the country, you're supposed to come at least on those 3 days. You can't go there every week to worship, but you go there those 3 days. And some who don't live in the land, of course, it'd be not really feasible for them to come if they're outside the land, even for those 3. But they would make pilgrimages. Some would try all 3 times. Some would come on some of the days at least make pilgrimages. They would go to Israel and to Jerusalem on days like this. So the place is filled with all these pilgrims. John Wayne, right? Pilgrim. So there were a lot of pilgrims there. Different kind of pilgrim, I think. Anyway,
yeah.
So filled the whole house where they were sitting. We think they're all sitting in that upper room, but the truth, via the context, is they wouldn't be able to talk to 3,000 people outside their one little tiny building at one time. Actually, way more than 3,000. That's how many accepted the message they give that day. The house is an idiom for
the synagogue.
The temple. The synagogue. No,
temple.
The temple. For the temple. She knew. She just died.
And how could 120 people fit in a house? They didn't. I don't think they had
in
really big
that little
houses.
room. That's a big room. You've been to that room. It's pretty
Yeah.
big. You could fit 120 in that room, but not in. Well, maybe.
It'd be pretty
tight.
crowded.
But the temple is easy. And see, they're in a section. They're not filling the house. They're in a part, the section where they were in the house, right? Is what we're talking about. And that's where this wind is filling it up. And they saw what looked like tongues of fire. Again, the theme of fire on Shavuot, which separated and came to, this time it separates though, and it comes down on them instead of on the mountain. And they were all filled with the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, or the Spirit of holiness, and began to talk in different languages. In some versions it says tongues. We talked about that earlier today. Tongues are languages. As the Spirit enabled them to speak. And there's a reason why they're speaking in languages. Remember, and we talked about from Corinthians, there's that the tongues are not assigned, they're assigned, but they're not assigned to believers, they're assigned to unbelievers. And what's happening here? There's 120 of them, but they're surrounded by thousands of people who do not believe in Yeshua at this point. Right? And what is it that these tongues, that they do with these tongues, they're speaking the message of Yeshua. We're not in that part of the chapter yet, but they start speaking the message of Yeshua
in the language.
in different languages. So all these
There.
people who had come to Jerusalem from all these different countries, who are Jewish people from all these countries and acolytes and God-fearers, to worship God from all these different countries, so they would understand in their own language. And that's what it says, staying in Jerusalem, Jews from every nation under heaven. It's not just people from every nation under heaven, but Jewish people from every nation under heaven. When they heard the sound and the crowd gathered, they were confused because each one of them, these Jews from every nation, heard the believers speaking in his own language. I keep saying that because some people think that these were, for some reason, they're Gentiles from every country who suddenly, for some weird reason, came to Jerusalem. I don't know why, because it fits their theology. I don't know. Totally amazed, they asked, how is this possible? Aren't these people who are speaking from the Galil? How do they know all of our languages, right? How do we hear each of them speaking in our native languages? We're from, and it goes through the list of different places, Jews by birth and proselytes. So see, I wasn't making that up or something. There's not just Jews, but people who were coming to Judaism as well from more places. How is we hear them speaking our own languages about the great things God has done? That's what they're talking about in actual languages. Amazed and confused, they went on asking each other, what does this mean? And some people made fun of them, right? Because if I'm speaking French, then the French people understand me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't called French then, right? And that's not the Hebrew word for French. Anyways, but if I'm speaking French, then the French people will understand me, but the Spaniards will not.
Or
And
the
they may
Germans
say,
or
sounds
the
like this guy's
Italians.
babbling, like he's drunk or something,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they make fun of some of them. Right, makes sense. So Kepha stood up. That's Shimon. Kepha stood up with the 11, not 12, which is interesting because they've already voted a 12th in. I guess he went on vacation after that or something.
Well,
right? I don't know.
I take it to understand he stood up and the 11.
Oh, that's right,
stood
with
up
the
him,
11.
with
Oh,
the
thanks.
11,
See?
not as part of the
Good thing I
11.
got it here. Keep me straight.
Mm-hmm.
So with the 11, so that's 12 then, and raised his voice to address them. You Judeans, and all of you staying here in Jerusalem, let me tell you what this means. Listen to me carefully. These people aren't drunk, as you suppose. It's only 9 in the morning. That's interesting because what happens at 9 in the morning? We know another reason we know they're at the temple. The hour of prayer. Services at the temple were at 9 a.m. At 3 p.m. That's Shacharit, and Mincha is 3 p.m. and also at noon. And there was another service in the evening. These people are drunk as you, but it's 9 in the morning. No, this is not something like this is what was spoken about through the prophet Yoel. Adonai says in the last days. So they saw this as the last days. The last days were in the last days still. This was the opening of the Acharit Hayamim, the end of days, the latter days. I will pour out from my spirit upon everyone. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. Even on my slaves, both men and women, will I pour out from my spirit in those days, and they will what? Prophesy. And what does that mean? Are they talking about predictions in the future? Partly. It's about giving the word of God, whatever that happens to be. And some of that may be about the future. Make sense? Whipped cream on cheesecake. Oh, now I've got that's just, my stomach's growling now. Whipped cream on cheesecake. Oh. All right. And so even on my slaves, both men and women, will I pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. I will perform miracles in the sky above and signs on the earth below. And that's what they're starting to see. Blood, fire, and thick smoke. Sounds like Shavuot in Shemot. The sun, Shemesh, will become dark, and the moon blood before the great and fearful day of Adonai comes. See, the day of Adonai was not the first day of the week. It's a day when he returns. It's a dreadful day that people, that many people should be very terrified about.
Mm-hmm.
Prophets talk about that by prophesying in another way about the future. It's the word of God about the future. And then at that point, whoever calls on the name of Adonai will be saved. That's the context for that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the day of Adonai. And we know from Hebrews that we just read that when he returns, we know from Zechariah, we will see, all the Jewish people will see the piercings in his hands and his side, his feet, and they will mourn for him as for an only child, and they will accept him as the Messiah. Romans tells us that's when they will be grafted back in, and all Israel will be saved. There's no denying, that's the Messiah when this is happening. And some will. I've heard some people argue about that, saying, no, a whole nation can't come to God. It's got to be individual decision, right? Well, the thing is, how is that individual decision happen? In every case, it's because God draws the person and God makes it happen, right? Is what the theology of these same people would say. And so that's exactly what's being said in Hebrews, is that God is able to graft them back in again. And at the beginning of that chapter, it's talking about God will turn away the ungodliness of Jacob, right? So he's the one that's making it happen for all the Jewish people who are left at that particular time, who are besieged and surrounded in the same place where this is happening here in Jerusalem. In the end of days, there would be another harvest, and all of Israel would be saved. Men of Israel, listen to this. Yeshua from Nazareth was a man demonstrated to you to have been from God by the powerful works, miracles, and signs that God performed through him in your presence. You saw it. You yourselves know this. Even though they're from all over the world, why would they know this if they're from all over the world? Because there are 3 pilgrimages every single year, and Yeshua was a Torah-observant Jew who went every single year. He obeyed the commandments. If he didn't, he was a sinner. He went every time. He didn't go to Jerusalem like 3 or 4 times that we read about. He went every year on all of these pilgrimages as a faithful Jew. That's a lot. He'd been there at least 90-something, if not over 100 times, at least.
I mean, that was when he went with his parents, too.
He even went there on times like Hanukkah. We read about him being there as well, right? So you yourselves know this. This man was arrested. So they had heard about him. Certain things about him. This man was arrested in accordance with God's predetermined plan. So what's predetermined and foreknowledge here is the plan. And through the agency of persons not bound by the Torah, that's the Romans, you nailed him on a stake and killed him. So even though the Romans are the ones that did it, they did it, by order of the Jewish rulers, really, of the city. But the rulers represent everyone that's under them. But God has raised him up and freed him from the suffering of death. It was impossible that death could keep its hold on him. For David says this about him, talking about King David says this about Yeshua. He said, I saw Adonai always before me, for he is at my right hand, so that I will not be shaken. For this reason my heart was glad and my tongue rejoiced, and now my body too will live on in certain hope that you will not abandon me to Sheol, or let your Holy One see decay. You have made known to me the ways of life, and you will fill me with joy by your presence. David wrote that, but who is he writing about? It says here, brothers, I know I can say to you frankly that the patriarch David, or Dawid in ancient Hebrew, died and was buried. His tomb is with us today. Again, if we were going to Israel, we were going to go to David's tomb. Well, one day. Therefore, since he was a prophet, you know, David was a prophet, and knew that God had sworn an oath to him that one of his descendants would sit on his throne, he was speaking in advance about the resurrection of Messiah. David was talking about the resurrection of Messiah. What a claim. It's right there. And it was he who was not abandoned, talking about Yeshua, who was not abandoned, this descendant of David, not abandoned in Sheol, and whose flesh did not see decay. God raised up this Yeshua, and we are all witnesses of it. And most of them died as witnesses of it in horrible ways. They were tortured. And that's one of the evidences, really. If you die for something you believe in, that's one thing. But why would you purposely die under torture for something you don't believe in, when all you have to do is say, okay, you're right, I was faking. You're right, it's a lie. And you go free. Nobody does that in their right mind. But all of these people went to their deaths, and some of them happily, singing hymns. Amazing. Amazing. We are all witnesses of it. Moreover, he has been exalted at the right hand of God and received from the Father what he promised, namely the Ruach HaKodesh, and has poured out this gift, which you are both seeing and hearing. For David did not ascend into heaven. David didn't go up and ascend into the heavens, but he says, Adonai said to my Lord. Okay, so Adonai said, this is David speaking. David, I'm talking to you. David, I'm talking to you. Okay, and I'm saying, Adonai said to my Lord. Now, in this case, Lord is actually Adon, right? So he's not saying Adonai said to Adonai like God said to my God, but who is the master of the king of Israel? When you're the king, no one else is your master except for God. God's the master. The Messiah would be the master of the king, though, right? He's the ultimate king. So that's what's happening here. Adonai said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. With me? Still awake out there? Did that go going too fast? Therefore, let the whole house, this is very interesting, right? Where are the 10 lost tribes? Okay, let me read to you verse 36. Therefore, let the whole house of Israel know. Apparently, all 12 tribes are represented here, if not altogether. We even saw Hannah, the prophetess, when he was born, was from a particular tribe of Israel. And there's evidence. A lot of them stayed, a lot of them came back from the exile, yada, yada. There's still a lot that are out there, too. Everyone didn't come back. Neither did all the Jews, meaning the people from Yehuda, come back. But a lot of them did. Let all the house of Israel know beyond doubt that God has made him both Lord, Adon, and Mashiach, Messiah, this Yeshua, whom you executed on a stake. Okay, so the Spirit came, gave them the ability to speak all these different languages so they could communicate with these people from all over the world. And the reason was to give them the message. On hearing this, did it have any results? When the Spirit enables you and empowers you, and you act with that enablement and that empowerment, and you do what you're called to do, you do what you're supposed to do, does it yield results? Let's find out. Verse 37. On hearing this message, they were stung in their hearts. Oh, I don't know if you've ever been stung, but it hurts when you get stung. It's a great idiom right there. You ever been stung in your heart?
Yeah.
not literally, right?
No,
Figuratively.
figuratively.
And they said to Kepha and to the other emissaries, what a beautiful thing. Everyone wants to hear this if you're out there trying to reach people for the Messiah, right? They said to them, brothers, what should we do? Kepha answered them, turn from sin, return to God. What is that? That's the
Teshuvah.
definition.
Teshuvah.
And each of you, and after Teshuvah, and each of you be immersed. We had an immersion today. Little Emmy came to Messiah, and she was immersed today. Be immersed on the authority of Yeshua the Messiah into forgiveness of your sins. If you do that, and you will receive the gift of the Ruach HaKodesh. What you're seeing here, you will receive that gift. Doesn't necessarily mean you'll have, the tongues thing. God, the Spirit gives gifts as He pleases, whatever is needed for what He's called you to do. For the promise is for you, for your children, and for those far away, as many as Adonai our God may call. And there were other arguments, and people accepted. And there was like 3,000 accepted that day, and they kept meeting in the temple courts daily. This is verse 46, right? And day after day, Adonai kept adding to those who were being saved. Amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to end there. I want to go to Acts 10, because the Spirit is not only, this was like the Jewish people, and you think the Jewish, the good news is supposed to be coming from Jerusalem, spreading out to the world. And some people say, well, they didn't do that. They just sat around Jerusalem for years. Well, hello, all these Jewish people that came from all over the world and heard this message and accept Yeshua, they didn't all stay there. They went home to their families, Some of them maybe stayed and settled or something because of this, But you have to think, logically, a lot of them went home and they brought the message with them. This is why the news spreads, and you see Shaul or other people going out to spread the message, and occasionally they're finding people who already know. How did that happen? Well, about 3,000 people leaving Jerusalem with a message, right, very early on. But this is the Jewish message to this point, largely. So what about the Gentiles? So that's why I want to come to chapter 10. And I hope you can still understand me well. And I won't go past chapter 10. I promise. And what happens in chapter 10 is the same Spirit is given to the Aruah. Spoiler alert, the same Spirit is given to the Goyim. But particular Goyim, and we're going to look at that. Who were they and why did they get it at this point? There was a man in Caesarea, that's how you pronounce it, Caesarea, named Cornelius, a Roman army officer, of all things, in what was called the Italian regiment. And it says about this Roman army officer that he was a devout man, a God-fearer. Now you might think, people, if you don't understand the context, if you don't understand the cultural context or the scriptural context, the understanding of God, what a God-fearer is someone who's accepted God or acknowledged God, the one true living God, and is following the Torah as best they can. But if it's a guy, they haven't taken the last final steps to being included in the people of Israel, which at that point meant circumcision. And possibly the Tevila, because that's usually the last thing. In other words, he was a Gentile, but even being a Gentile, he was following Torah the best he could. The only thing he didn't do is become Jewish. You with me? And that's God-fear. As was his whole household. They were all God-fearers.
Mm-hmm.
Are you with me? He gave more than that. He gave generously. We're talking about giving generously to charities. He gave generously to help the Jewish poor and prayed regularly to God. One afternoon, around 3 o'clock, remember in Acts 2, it was time of prayer, 9 a.m., Shavuot. Now it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, again, a time of prayer at the temple, the Mincha prayer. He saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying to him, Cornelius. Cornelius stared at the angel, terrified. What is it, sir? He asked. Your prayers, replied the angel, and your acts of charity have gone up into God's presence so that he has you in mind. We need to pause and think about that for a minute. The prayers of someone who was not Jewish, the prayers of a Gentile, a Roman officer, are being noticed by God. Along with his acts of charity. When you do charitable acts, God takes notice. And sent some men to Joppa. Joppa is really a nice little city. City. Right by Tel Aviv now. To bring back a man named Shimon, also called Kepha. Right? He's staying with Shimon, a different Shimon, the leather tanner, who has a house by the sea. And there's still a house by the sea that they call Peter's house. But no one really knows if it's the right house.
Might be it, it might not be it.
Yeah. At least it's a house by the sea in Joppa. And there aren't that many to pick from. As the angel that had spoken to him went away, Cornelius called 2 of his household slaves and one of his military aides, who was a godly man. Even one of his military, he was, there was influence going on here. One of his military aides was a godly man. He explained everything to them. So he didn't fear sharing about his experiences with the God of Israel. He's sharing it with this other Roman soldier. His aide explained everything that happened to him and sent them to Joppa. Oh, not just aides, to them. So he's sharing openly his faith. The next day, about noon, well, they were still on their way, which is another time of prayer, but they were still on the way, and approaching the city, Kepha went up on the roof of the house to pray. So there's 3 different times of prayer in these chapters that we're seeing, right? He began to feel hungry and wanted something to eat, but when they were preparing the meal, he fell into a trance, in which he saw heaven open and something that looked like a large sheep being lowered to the ground by its 4 corners. In it were all kinds of 4-footed animals, crawling creatures, and wild birds. And a voice came to him, Get up, Kepha, slaughter and eat. But Kepha said, No way, Jose. No, sir, absolutely not. I have never eaten food that was unclean or torn. The voice spoke to him a second time. Stop treating as unclean what God has made clean. This happened to him 3 times, and then the sheet was immediately taken back up into heaven. And Kepha said, oh, well, okay. I'm going to go get me a ham sandwich. I always wanted to try one of those ham sandwiches and get me some sizzling bacon. No, that's not what happened. Verse 17, Kepha was still puzzling over the meaning of the vision. Why was he puzzling? It seems pretty clear to me. You should just go get some bacon, right? No. Yeshua never told him that. He was with him all this time. He said, when the man Cornelius had sent, having inquired for Shimon's house, stood at the gate and called out to ask if Shimon known as Kepha, was staying there, while Kepha's mind was still on the vision, the Spirit said, 3 men are looking for you. Get up, go downstairs, and have no misgivings about going with them, because I myself have sent them. So Kepha went down and said to the men, you were looking for me. Here I am. What brings you here? They answered, Cornelius. He's a Roman army officer, an upright man, and a God-fearer. And we get more information about Cornelius here. He, a man highly regarded by the whole Jewish nation. By the whole Jewish nation. And he was told by a holy angel to have you come to his house and listen to what you have to say. Now Kepha is thinking, go to a Gentile's house? What? Right? Because Mishnah, oral Torah, because the man-made commandments, fencing the Torah, said you can't do that. So Kepha invited, but now he's thinking, God told me to go with them. I'm confused, but I better go. God said to.
Mm-hmm.
So Kepha invited them to be his guests. Apparently it was late in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Don't want to miss this part. He's being hospitable to Roman soldiers in his home. The next day, he got up and went with them, accompanied by some of the brothers from Yaffo. He arrived at Caesarea the day after that. So it's a 2-day travel walking.
Mm-hmm.
Yaffo to Caesarea. Not very long in the car, though, is it?
No.
Cornelius was expecting them. He had already called together his relatives and close friends. As Kepha entered the house, Cornelius met him and fell prostrate at his feet. But Kepha pulled him to his feet and said, stand up. I myself am just a man. We saw that same theme with Shaul when he's, was it Athens or Corinth? Right?
Somewhere, yeah.
Trying to remember. Maybe somebody could help me out there. When they thought he was Hermes because he had the big mouth, and his friend was Zeus.
Right.
Anyway, and they tried to worship them, and they had to stop them there too. And the angels stopped people from worshiping them, but Yeshua did not stop his Talmidim from kneeling and bowing before him and worshiping him before he went up. Interesting. Okay, as he talked with them, Kepha went inside and found many people gathered. He said to them, and this is the meaning of the vision, by the way. He's going to share with them the meaning of the vision. You are well aware that for a man who is a Jew to have close association with someone who belongs to another people or to come and visit him is something that just isn't done. But God has shown me, not just told me, but shown me. How did he show him something? The thing God showed him was this vision. God has shown me not to call any person common or unclean. Talking about the vision is really about people. It's figurative about people. So when I was summoned, I came without raising any questions. Tell me then, why did you send for me? Cornelius answered, 3 days ago, around this time, I was at Mincha prayers in my house, when suddenly a man, remember it said it was an angel, now it's a man.
Mm-hmm.
A man in shining clothes stood in front of me and said, God has heard your prayer and remembered your acts of charity. Now send to Yaffo and ask for Shimon known as Kepha. He's staying in the house with Shimon the leather tanner by the sea. That's pretty specific.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent for you immediately, and you've been kind enough to come. Now all of us are here in the presence of God to hear everything the Lord Adonai has ordered you to say. When you go somewhere to speak, that will give you courage. That will, you know what I mean? When they're all sitting there wanting, you can tell when people are just getting a check in the box. They're there for service today because it's a check in the box. It's just what they're supposed to do, right? Or you go somewhere and people are like, man, we were waiting for this. What do you have to say, man of God? Give us your message, right? Very different attitude. All of us are here in the presence of God to hear everything the Lord has ordered you to say. And Kepha addressed them. I now understand that God does not play favorites. Remember I talked about that earlier. God does not play favorites, but that whoever fears him. See, al tira, don't fear right now, al tira. But doesn't mean don't ever fear anything. Whoever fears him and does what is right, is acceptable to him, no matter what people he belongs to, Jew or Gentile. Right? Hey, dude, you think shorts are getting too long? I just want to breathe a little. Where did that come from? Whoever fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him, no matter what people he belongs to. And this is key, and this is where it ends, right? The rest of the chapter ends with this. It's in the start of the end is this 4 words. Here is the message. You want to know the message? You want to know the good news? You want to hear the message? There's different versions. You ask different people, pastors, priests, rabbis, what's the message? What's the gospel? You get all kinds of different answers. And sometimes you see a little bit of differentiation in the scripture itself. But here's one short, concise version. Here is the message that he sent to the sons of Israel, announcing shalom through Yeshua the Messiah, who is Lord of everything. You know what's been going on throughout Yehuda, starting from the Galil after the immersion that Yochanan proclaimed, how God anointed Yeshua from Nazareth with the Ruach HaKodesh and with power. How Yeshua went about doing good and healing all the people oppressed by the adversary because God was with him, right? As for us, we are witnesses. We are witnesses of everything he did, both in Judean countryside and in Jerusalem. They did away with him by hanging him on a stake, but God raised him up on the 3rd day and let him be seen on Bikurim, 50 days, before Shavuot. Not by all the people, but by witnesses God had previously chosen, that is, by us, who ate and drank with him after he had risen again from the dead. And we know that at one point there was like 500 people at one time saw him. There were a lot of people that saw him, but not everyone. Then he commanded us to proclaim and attest to the Jewish people that this man has been appointed. That was at Shavuot, right? He commanded us to proclaim and attest to the Jewish people that this man has been appointed by God to judge the living and the dead. All the prophets. How many of the prophets? All the prophets bear witness to him that everyone who puts his trust. What did the prophets bear witness by doing? How did the prophets bear witness to him? By saying that everyone who puts his trust in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name. All the prophets are bearing witness to that. Throughout the Tanakh, Kepha was still saying these things. So that was the message. Kepha was still saying these things, still giving this message when the Ruach HaKodesh fell on all those who were hearing the message, and all the believers from the circumcision faction, by the way, happened to be there, who had accompanied Kepha. That's who accompanied him. People from the circumcision faction. That's the ones who believed, for thousands, and you can't fault them, for many hundreds of years. How you came and became a part of the people of God if you were a male included not just being the God-fearer, but going and taking that last step and getting the circumcision, become part of the people of God, like those mixed multitude that went up with us from Egypt. But it's different now. God already showed that these people are accepted in their current state. And these believers from the circumcision faction who had accompanied Kepha were amazed that the gift of the Ruach HaKodesh had been poured out on the Gentiles, for they heard them speak in tongues or languages and praising God. Kepha's response was, is anyone prepared to prohibit these people from being immersed in water? After all, they've received the Ruach HaKodesh just as we did. And he ordered that they be immersed in the name of Yeshua, the Messiah. And then they asked Kepha to stay on with them for a few days. I think all these themes have flowed together today. You know, the first fruits, the harvest, what you need to do to be, what the message is, what you need to do to be saved, right? And that including, you know, the teshuva, putting your faith in him, in that message, and acknowledging that message, and showing it that you believe it by having the immersion, which amazingly and interestingly, we had one today on Shavuot. Okay.
Well, the day before Shavuot.
I'm pretty sure you guys probably had enough by now. But let me. So we'll go ahead and do a blessing. I haven't seen a comment for a long time. I'm wondering if you're sleeping. Context is about, it's about people this particular time. There are other verses, and they that people, you know, claim and believe to have associate with kashrut and that are not understood properly as well, and we can look at them one by one, and you know, maybe do a message on that. I think Keith was talking about he wanted to do a message on that, and maybe we'll let him have him do that one of these weeks. Yeah, we've done it in the past, but it's been quite a while. Or pick just a couple, 2, 3 of them or something even. But for now, Shavuot is here, so get some cheesecake, you know, if you can. If you got some cheesecake, eat some cheesecake. Don't go out and Nehemiah, speaking of Shabbat, right? This one's kind of controversial for some people, right? Is when we came back from exile, and we were exiled for not following the Torah. We came back from exile, and then you found that one of the things that's happening in Nehemiah, is that there are merchants coming to the city on Shabbat and people are buying and selling stuff. Nehemiah said, "No, we just came back from exile for not following the Torah. Now you want to desecrate Shabbat by doing this? No!" And he kicked them out of the city. Then he found that people were sneaking out of the city to see the merchants outside the city who were camping outside the city on Shabbat. And he said, "I'm going to chase you guys out of here with armed forces if you're camped out here next week," right? So apparently Nehemiah seems to be under the impression that buying and selling on Shabbat is not right, right? Because if you're buying and selling, the people who you're buying from are working, right? Makes sense? And if you're selling, you're the one working. And like we said, there are things, you know, that we don't want to disobey God, and we don't want to make other people disobey God. Make sense? I don't know what those are. Oh, is it cheesecake?
Are you sharing cheesecake with us, Zimra? If so, man, thank you.
That would be so nice to have some cheesecake, but I blew it. We can get some late cheesecake, I guess. When the sun goes down tomorrow. We make it some. Anywho, all right. So it was great to have you with us. Congratulations, by the way. You should get a prize for staying this long.
Right?
10:30. What? Okay, that's only 2 hours. That's not so bad, really. But we started at 8:30, so.
You made up for this afternoon, right?
Is that what happened? I don't know. It wasn't that short this afternoon. Okay. Let's go ahead and find the blessing. So enjoy your day and make it a day of study because it's a day to celebrate the Ruach HaKodesh. It's also a day to virtual cheesecake. Thank you very much.
Toda Rabbah.
So it's a day to celebrate Torah. And some people stay up all night with an all-night Bible study or all-night Torah study. So I hope I've inspired you, at least, to go further with your studies, whether it be tonight or tomorrow or both, and enjoy. And the reason we're associated with milk, by the way, because the Torah is associated with milk. Okay. Sometimes. Okay. Because it's figurative. It's not always the same. Like leaven. Leaven's not always representing sin. Sometimes it's representing the kingdom of God in one parable. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Yair Adonai panav elecha v'yichulecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Adonai bless you and keep you, guard you and protect you, make you happy. Adonai make his face to shine on you and be gracious to you, giving you his favor and his mercy, even though none of us deserve it. Adonai lift up his countenance upon you, not turn away from you, but put his presence on you and in you, and give you his perfect holistic peace, make you whole, fulfill you, and give you his shalom. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen.
Amen. Shavuot Tov.
Shavuot Tov.
Chag Shavuot Sameach.
Chag Shavuot Sameach. Happy Feast of Shavuot. Shalom.